As I've covered before in previous poorly explained comics, feel free to watch if you haven't already, I could use the views, Jaime Reyes is not the first Blue Beetle, but he is the first Blue Beetle created for DC Comics. The first Blue Beetle, Dan Garrett, was created by Fox Comics in 1939. This original version was not very consistent in either tone, career, or superpowers, but things really start to get interesting in the 50s. See, Fox Comics went out of business, and Blue Beetle was allegedly acquired by Charlton Comics. Apparently there was no actual proof of a formal sale, but it was the 50s and nobody cared who owned what comics-wise. After about a decade of reprints, Charlton gave Dan a new series and re-envisioned his concept. He was now an archaeologist empowered by a mystical scarab that he'd found in the tomb of an ancient pharaoh. By speaking the phrase Kaji Da, he was empowered with the fairly standard array of super strength, flight, and energy blasts. The new run would only last for a couple of years before he was replaced by the second Blue Beetle. A former student of Garrett's, Ted Kord, had gotten his old teacher's help investigating his uncle, Jarvis Kord, who it turned out was assembling an army of indestructible robots to take over the world. His laboratory is the same one that Conrad Carapax would end up breaking into. Jarvis was stopped, but both he and Dan Garrett perished in the struggle, leaving Ted to take up the mantle of Blue Beetle. As the scarab had been lost with Dan, Ted took to crime fighting by using his genius intellect to create a wide array of gadgets in lieu of superpowers, as well as a distinctive airship known as the Bug. Flash forward to the 80s, where ownership of the Blue Beetle took another interesting turn. Charlton sold most of its self-labeled action hero lineup, which included Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, The Question, and Peacemaker, to DC Comics, who sequestered them on their own Earth, Earth 4, in the broader DC multiverse. With the acquisition of these characters, esteemed comic writer, later turned justified comic cynic Alan Moore pitched a story proposal that would use the Charlton characters in an epic deconstructive superhero story. But DC declined, as said proposal would have rendered several of the characters unusable, and they wanted to keep their options open. Moore would still make the story for DC, but instead of using the Charlton characters, he made original parallels to them instead. And for those who haven't been rolling their eyes waiting for me to get on with the point because you know where this is going, that story was Watchmen, the Blue Beetles serving as an inspiration for Night Owl, the main character you don't remember because he isn't uber-powerful, a font of poorly aged mimetic dialogue, the villain, or the one female. Anyways, with the Crisis on Infinite Earths blowing up the DC multiverse, Ted Kord was folded into the history of the one remaining universe. Dan Garrett was temporarily resurrected by the Scarab and driven mad, leading the two Beetles to fight each other, but Garrett soon went back to being dead, and Ted resolved never to use the Scarab, having seen what it did to his mentor. In his time at DC, Ted was probably best known for being part of the Justice League International, where he became best friends and something of a superhero double act with Booster Gold. Tragically, Ted Kord was killed in the lead-up to Infinite Crisis in 2005. In the process of tracking down a stolen shipment of kryptonite, and with most of the rest of the superhero community ignoring his hunches that something bigger was afoot, Ted stumbled upon the evil organization Checkmate, which was planning to use Brother Eye and the OMAC project to kill all superhumans, and headed by Maxwell Lord, former benefactor of the JLI and friend of Ted's. Lord offered him the opportunity to join them, but in one of the most underrated displays of superhero chutzpah to date, Ted simply replied, "Go to hell, Max," at which point he was shot and killed. Like most superheroes for the fanbase, though, he's come back a few times. Booster Gold temporarily resurrected him by snatching him out of time from before his death, but Ted gave himself back up to prevent an even worse timeline from transpiring. He then came back as a zombie in Blackest Night, resurrected by the death entity Necron, but that didn't stick for long, and also, does it really count if he was a zombie? Anyways, the New 52 finally brought Ted back, but as a minor character with no association with the Blue Beetle, and with his successor Jaime already equipped with the Scarab. In the wake of the complete restoration of DC history, starting with DC Rebirth, though, Ted's been restored to his rightful place in the Blue Beetle legacy, and is even sharing the name with Jaime. Next week? I have no idea. Depends what happens in Blue Beetle, I guess.